What's going on, guys? It's your boy. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the new F1 the movie that's currently out in theaters. I really enjoyed it when I watched it. The more that I'm thinking about it, the more that I'm kind of like picking it to pieces. So I'm going to come on here, make my full-length review. It's going to be very nitpicky. I apologize in advance. Let's dive into this.
Modern movie review.
Okay, so right off the bat, I do want to go ahead and start with the positives. This movie is like a tried and trusted film. It's definitely 100% going to work because it is an incredibly generic sports movie. If you've seen any racing movie before, it essentially is exactly that. The movie Gran Turismo that came out a couple of years ago arguably hits pretty much all of the exact same story beats. In my opinion, that movie does it a little bit better. I'm not going to try to compare these two movies that much, but at the same time, they're racing movies that have came out in the last 2 years. It's kind of inevitable that they're going to get compared to each other. And then another movie that it's incredibly similar to is Ford versus Ferrari, because in Ford versus Ferrari, you have a really old mechanic who knows and loves everything about cars and is obsessed with the idea of racing. And he goes back into racing for the first time in a really long time. And it's like this big triumphant moment for him. And in this movie, it's really damn similar. It's Brad Pitt is an older driver who's somebody who tried doing the F1 thing. It didn't really work out. And since then, he has been kind of hopping around from different racing circuit to racing circuit. And he's, just kind of somebody who's a freelancer. He has a good time. He lives in a van and he just races because that's something he enjoys doing. And I think that on the one hand, Brad Pitt has so much charisma that it's really hard not to enjoy his character. I think that Sonny Hayes is a very interesting character. I like the fact that they do a lot of like show don't tell, which is something that is huge in movies nowadays. I feel like a lot of movies are getting really lazy with the whole dialogue and they'll just like over explain everything. Instead, they just kind of like show the things that he takes with him everywhere that's really important. The picture of him and his dad, the watch that he purposely puts on display right in front of the picture of him and his dad. He has a deck of cards that he's constantly, keeping with him. He was a gambler. And there's a lot of little small details about his character that you pick up on based off of just visual clues, which I do really like. I think that is fantastic anytime a movie can do something like that. But it also makes it where a lot of times when we're being introduced to other characters in the movie, like Damson Idris's character, and they're having to like use dialogue to over-explain literally everything. And he has a guy who's like his PR manager who's kind of like over-explaining his character. That also kind of is like really weird because it's like, on the one hand, you're doing a great job with Brad Pitt's character. Damson Idris, when he's first being introduced, they like have Javier Bardem's character, Ruben, kind of explain to Brad Pitt who this character is, what his whole gist is. And then you have another character come in, explain who this guy is, explain his whole gist. And then you have him himself show up and kind of introduce himself and what his whole gist is. So it's like, at this point, you've been introduced to the character 3 times. And that feels so redundant. So, like I said, there's going to be a lot of nitpicks in this movie. And the reason for that is because since the plot is so generic, I want to dive into the fact that this movie kind of corners itself a little bit. It kind of gives itself a lot of problems that I personally am very overanalyzing, and I understand that a lot of people who casually go and see this movie will probably enjoy it a lot. I know that a lot of F1 fans are upset with this movie, and rightfully so. And I think that I personally, a big part of the reason why I have a lot of issues with it is because it's following a lot of familiar story beats, but in my opinion, the majority of them, it's not doing better than any of the past ones, which makes it really difficult. So for one major plot point that I really hate about this movie that at no point really ever gets addressed is this is a competition. It is a sport, right? F1 racing, it's very competitive. And at some point in the movie, you would expect either Sonny Hayes or Joshua Pierce, who is Damson Idris's character, you'd expect one of the two of them to be interacting with one of the other racers at some point in the movie. But because they decided to have this take place in the real world, and he's going against people like Lewis Hamilton and actual big named F1 racers, instead of them actually having sequences where they're competing head-to-head against other racers, they're just head against each other. And on the one hand, yeah, that works a little bit, but at the same time, these guys are teammates. And Sonny Hayes, right, to put this into perspective, is an American race car driver who already probably is not going to be getting a lot of love from people who are in F1. And that's something that drives me insane about this movie. He gets a bunch of fans really quickly in F1. I don't think they're going to be loving this new hotshot who comes in and is driving recklessly and literally causing, these other people to be in danger. Like, this guy is driving very recklessly. He's going to start fights. And it's something that drives me insane. In the opening for this movie, right, Sonny Hayes is doing the 25 hours at Daytona, and he's driving very recklessly. And when he gets out of his car, another racer wants to go and literally fist fight him. And Sonny Hayes does not change his racing style at all this entire movie. He's constantly driving like a dick, and a lot of the shit he does, for one, just straight up would not slide in F1, and for two, he would be getting in fights with other drivers. But the entire course of the movie, like I said, neither him or Joshua Pierce, the other driver on this team, interacts with a single other racer. Hey, that's not how sports works. And if you're making a sports movie, you kind of want to make sure that it's accurate to sports. I feel like this movie really lacked tension there because at no point have we ever seen even another one of the drivers a little bit. We get to see, the people who are like the heads of like Ferrari and the people who are the heads of this other racing team, and they're bashing, this AXP whatever team. But at no point do we actually see the people who they're competing against them. And that's really stupid. Like, that's really bad. Like, I feel like that's just like really underdeveloped. I don't know why the hell they didn't feel like there should be competition in a sports movie, but that to me felt really weird. And before somebody's like, oh, but they had the racing sequences. Yeah, but at no point do they really like have any moments where it's like, oh, this is their number one rival, or oh, this is the person they're fighting against. The entire movie is just them having to overcome themselves. And like, on the one hand, that could work, but on the other hand, they're just racers, and they obviously get their race technician to make them a better car, but they aren't training and doing things to make themselves better throughout the course of the movie. They're just kind of just getting better because their car is getting better, and obviously working as a team and kind of building up that whole like, well, when you work as a team, everything's gonna be okay. But like, I don't know. I just really felt a giant disconnect with this movie because it's a sports movie that lacks that competitive edge and that competitive nature. But to get back to some of the more positive things, all of the actors and actresses here are absolutely fantastic. Javier Bardem absolutely stole the show in a couple of sequences. I think that he's incredibly entertaining. I think that his comedic timing and comedic chops are phenomenal. And I think that him and Brad Pitt's dynamic whenever they were on screen together is always a really, really good time. I love that. I think that Brad Pitt has a lot of great emotional depth to him. I think there's a lot of moments in this movie that wouldn't particularly work with other actors. I've seen a lot of people saying that Brad Pitt is miscast in this role, and I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think that Brad Pitt is pretty perfect for this role, and I will admit it's one of those things where it's like Brad Pitt has a tendency to play Brad Pitt in things, and in this one he felt different. Like, I do think that he felt like a genuinely different character. He felt like somebody who is, just trying to get back into this sport that he's been super passionate about his entire life. And he feels like somebody who's like, trying to walk around like he has all this confidence and like he knows what he's doing. But like secretly deep down, he just wants to do better, right? And he just wants to be like the best. And even though he kind of is like playing it off like that's not necessarily something he wants it, and you can tell that it's something that's driving him throughout this movie, and I really like that. I think that that's cool. I think Rebecca Ferguson, absolutely phenomenal in this movie. She has an accent. I don't know if it's just because I hadn't been paying enough attention to the trailers. I was jump scared by that. She has a very strong Irish accent in this movie. Their little love fling, relatively good. I feel like it could have been developed more, but Sony Hayes being like kind of like the freelancer or whatever, and he's going to go and continue to do his own thing after this movie ends, kind of like made it where they didn't really have to dive that deep into it, but that was weird. The fact that he didn't end this movie, I was expecting this movie, right? And I'm going to compare this to another racing movie, Cars, right? At the beginning of Cars, Lightning McQueen, completely a loner. He's somebody who's doing everything on his own. He doesn't really have friends. He literally just has his manager, right? We have Sony Hayes, a guy that's a loner, right? Decides to join F1, kind of creates this new family bond with everybody who works at this little racing team that is potentially going to get shot down. And they really have like this trauma bond almost, because like it's like a sinking ship and they're all going down together. But Sony Hayes kind of leads it and kind of gives them the optimism that they're going to have enough lifeboats for them to all be safe, right? And they start doing like running the tracks together before every race. They start really working together as a team very, very well. And it's really weird to me that Sony Hayes, none of his character arc is learning to work as a team. At the end of the movie, he's still just somebody who's a lone wolf. That felt odd to me because the whole length of this movie, he's kind of learning to be a team player, and he didn't learn anything. He just continued to go be by himself. That was weird. I don't know if that's just me, but that felt like really out of character. I don't know. That being said, his love for racing being the thing that drives him, I think, is really fun. The fact that people keep being like, why are you doing this? And he's just like, kind of brushing it off, but he explains why to Rebecca Ferguson's character in like a very intimate moment, that he's just chasing this feeling that you get when you're driving a car really, really fast. and I think that's cool. I really like that. And overall, a lot of the racing sequences are phenomenal. I will say this director did an incredible job with the racing sequences. I think that the having 16 different cameras hidden around the race cars is really cool. I love the fact that they built cars from scratch for this movie. Like, that's insanely epic to me. I think that the soundtrack is absolutely phenomenal. It's probably going to be the soundtrack of the year, in my opinion. I don't see any other movies coming out with the soundtrack that's going to top it. So I really like that. I think that that's incredible. And overall, I don't even know if I praised Damson Idris enough. He is phenomenal in this movie. He definitely plays somebody who's like trying to be too cool for school and like kind of like trying to give off this reputation that he's like really hard and he just wants to do whatever it takes to be popular. And then he also is like trying to deal with like the sentimental side of things. It's like, okay, well, maybe what I'm doing is wrong, and maybe I do need to actually take a step back and learn a thing or two. And I think that his character development throughout this movie is really good. But like I said, Sonny Hayes doesn't really grow as a character much at all, which I thought was really weird. So overall, had a good time with this movie. Is it a solid racing movie? Yes. Are the racing sequences absolutely incredible? Yes. Do I think that everything in between the racing sequences could have used a little bit of work? Absolutely. But I still had a really good time with it. Movie of the summer. I think that it's a movie that really benefits from being in a Dolby theater that has the really good surround sound. My movie theater that I go to, every single screen that they have is the Dolby. But if you can go see this in a Dolby movie theater, I think that it really is worth it. Because like I said, when I got out of the theater, I was like, this is one of the best movies I've seen all year. And I do think it's because of that theater atmosphere. I think that the surround sound, the racing, the sound effect, the Hans Zimmer score is so cinematic, so beautiful. So I definitely would recommend checking it out in theaters. That being said, if I was to give this movie a final rating on a scale of 1 to 100, as I typically do, I'm going to give this one a solid 82. Like I said, I don't think it's as good as movies like Gran Turismo or Ford versus Ferrari, but I think that it's entertaining enough and it's incredibly thrilling that you'll be on like the edge of your seat for the majority of the film. I just think that it hits a lot of character beats and doesn't hit them as well as some of the other movies like Gran Turismo, in my opinion. But yeah, that being said, that's it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for coming by and checking it out. I love and appreciate you guys so much for watching. And if you liked it, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll hopefully see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Pow, pow, pow.